So today I'm going to do something a little bit different. So throughout these playoffs, I've been doing individual previews and reviews of each of these playoff games. But today I'm actually going to do the preview of both conference final in a single video. I'll look at the Western Conference final first, and then I'll look at the Eastern Conference final because the Western Conference final is tomorrow and the Eastern Conference final is going to be happening on Sunday. So with the Western Conference final this year, it's between the Portland Timbers versus Real Salt Lake, and I'm pretty sure no one saw this Western Conference final happen. Like, if you would have predicted that this is the Western Conference final for this season, I wonder where your time machine is, because both of these teams. I mean, you could argue the Timbers is a team that can definitely make a run. Heck, I predicted them to make it to MLS Cup, and so far that prediction is still true and one step away from being happening. And not to mention the fact that I also predicted them to win MLS Cup, and they're just 2 wins away for making that prediction of mine look like an absolute genius. But whereas for Real Salt Lake, no one saw that they can go as deep as they are. Heck, I know there's going to be still people that's going to talk about that controversial call, and especially Sporting KC fans are probably still very salty about that controversial call. That probably is the reason why RSL is in this dance. But at the end of the day, you got to give credit what RSL has been doing, and they kind of did it in 2 different ways. Where in the last game, they basically did it in a way where it's kind of what their head coach Pablo Mastroeni likes them to do, which is kind of open themselves up and be that attacking team. And then against the Seattle Sounders, they kind of show the other version, which is just bunker and hope and pray we go to a PK shootout and eventually win in a PK shootout. Now, that being said, in terms of this matchup, well, this has not been a great matchup for RSL. In fact, throughout these 3 matchups that both of these teams have faced in the regular season, it has overly in favor of the Portland Timbers, which we'll get to why in the last 5 head-to-head matchup. But first, this game will start at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, 3:30 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff is 3:55 p.m. local time, and this game is going to be on FS1. The Timbers, of course, got to the Western Conference Final thanks to a 1-0 win against the Colorado Rapids on the road on Thanksgiving, while for RSL, they, of course, won 2-1 against Sporting KC away last Sunday, I believe. And there's no doubt that the Timbers does get a little bit more rest because, it's been a while since Thanksgiving has happened. But now let's talk about the last 5 head-to-head. This is where I talk about why the Timbers kind of had overly favored coming into the 3 regular season matchup, because the last matchup, it was a 3-1 win against RSL on the road, and that was the game where we thought RSL was dead and buried. Like, we thought that they were on verge of potentially getting eliminated. But then prior to that, Portland absolutely destroyed RSL 6-1, and that was the game when the Timbers we talk about how the Timbers, they always like to use their bread and butter, which is just play on the transition and look lethal on that. That was probably the most lethal we've seen that this season, with them just ripping apart RSL time and time again on the transition. Then they, of course, won 3-2 against RSL in a little bit of a closer matchup, although I think that was the game when RSL did get a late goal. So the scoreline is a little bit close. It wasn't as close as what the scoreline, of course, was suggested. But prior to that, it was a 2-1 win against the Portland Timbers. I forgot to write POR there next to the 1. And then, of course, prior to that, it was a crazy 4-4 game, and that was the game where I remember when the Timbers were up 4-2, and then they gave up 2 goals in stoppage time, and that was also when the Portland Timbers gave up late goals like it's Christmas present or something. Now, notable player that is going to be missing and questionable in this game, obviously the big player that's going to be missing in this game is Sebastian Blanco, although I did hear there was a report that there could be a possibility that he could be returning in this game. And, I just want to emphasize that it is a report and that I don't know if that report is actually true or not. And in some way, I don't think that that report is true, with the way that, he's coming off of a hamstring injury. And, I know it's been a while since the Timbers have played in a playoff game, but, 10 days, I just don't think isn't enough to trying to heal the hamstring. Like, unless if the Timbers have some miracle doctors in their medical team, there is no way that I can see Blanco recover this soon to be involved in this game. Now, that being said, I could be completely proven wrong in that he could basically come back into this game maybe as a sub. But I think if you're the Portland Timbers, yes, you're going to not have Blanco in this game. It's very tempted to put him in such a big game like this, but do you want to do so knowing the fact that yes, if you decide to rush him and he might get re-injure his hamstring or not, he's going to be out for a little bit more time, and there's more risk in terms of that, then I would say there's a reward of him potentially coming back in this game. Now, the other player that is going to be missing in this game is Darren Espria, who, of course, is suspended because of that red card. The Timbers did appeal it, but the appeal, of course, was declined by the independent disciplinary committee, though, I know Timbers fans are probably upset about that, but I'm not surprised. I mean, again, I know it was soft, but at the end of the day, when you put your hands on the face of an opponent, it's obviously going to be a red card, and that I just feel like that. Even with the way that Timbers fans might hope that maybe on the second look they feel like maybe Galvan kind of embellished that a little bit or made a meal out of it. At the end of the day, if you're Darren Espria, you cannot do that at that time. Like, your team is leading. The last thing you need to do something really stupid to basically cost your team, and we'll see whether or not if that is going to be the case, because again, the Timbers are going to be missing two of their most important attacker in this squad. Now, for RSL, the notable player that is missing and questionable, and it's not really questionable because I have heard reports that Albert Rusnak is back in training with this team, so he's out of COVID protocol list, and if he does return to this team, that will definitely be a huge boost to this RSL team. But in terms of the key points coming into this game, I talked about how Blanco and Espria not in this team for the Timbers. Well, who will step up for them to replace them in this game? I mean, they still have some good option in Felipe Mora, Yaroslav Niskoda, and Jimmy Chara. I'm assuming most likely, I would say Chara will move into that Blanco role. Well, actually, I don't think that would be the case because Chara is a winger and Blanco plays more as a number 10. But in terms of the Espria replacement, I'm assuming it's going to be Mora that's going to there. I mean, we've seen Niskoda has played in that spot before, but he's been more of an influential sub, so I'm assuming Felipe Mora is going to be back in that role. So, the Timbers, despite the fact that they are missing two of their most important attacker, and the fact that it's kind of a huge blow, it's not the end of the world because they do still have some very influenced attacker off the bench for them. Now, the other key point coming into this is that what version of RSL will be showed up in this game. So far, as I mentioned, we saw two versions of them, a team that can bunker and try to hope to win in a penalty kick shootout, and then a team that, try to open themselves up and actually have success for once. Now, in this game, I'm assuming they're going to go back to the version that they shown against the Seattle Sounders. I don't think they're going to decide to open themselves as much as they did against Sporting KC, because if they decide to do that, then they basically learn nothing from the game where they play against the Timbers, where they decide to open themselves up and the Timbers rip them apart. And if you're playing against a lethal counter-attacking team like the Portland Timbers, the last thing you want to is try to open yourself up and allow them to just kind of cut you open on the transition. So I'm assuming we're probably going to see a version of RSL that's trying to bunker and trying to make life hard for this Timbers side. And for the Timbers, this is why missing Blanco and Espria is such a huge kind of factor, because those are kind of the difference maker that can definitely play out and trying to show some creativity to break down this RSL bunker. Now, the other thing in this question is, it's something that I also mentioned. Will the return of Albert Rusnak add more flair to this RSL team on the attack? And the answer probably is going to be yes. I think it's going to add a little bit more attacking force to this team, because I think they really do miss Rusnak in their two games. I mean, in the last game, they kind of finally got things going, mainly because Anderson Julio decided that, this is the game he's going to show why he is one of the more underrated player in the league and just completely rip apart the Sporting KC team. But nevertheless, I think the addition of Rusnak back in this team will really help this RSL attack. And then the last thing, in terms of the key points, can the Timbers backline continue to withstand their excellent form in this match? I mean, that's been the big question for the Timbers coming into this game. We know that they have a good attack, but the big question for them to go deep into the playoffs, can their defense hold up? And so far, it's been hold up pretty well. I mean, they've only given up 1 goal in the 2 games. They survived against a team that I thought they were going to have a lot of an issue in terms of defending set pieces, that is the Colorado Rapids, and they didn't give up any goal, despite the fact that I did see that there was some times where the defense was a little bit shaky in terms of the set piece opportunity. But with that being said, they have definitely been in a much more excellent form, and it hasn't really show up as a team that have give up like some of the most goals in the league, and give up the most set piece goals in the league. I think that number kind of exaggerated because of, in the middle part of the regular season when they basically did that regularly, and especially the fact that in that game against the Seattle Sounders when they lost 6-2, that was a game they gave out a ton of set piece opportunities. So that number is kind of inflated because of that game, but overall their defense is not as bad as some people have said, and especially in the playoffs, it's been excellent so far in this playoffs. But that being said, I am now going to move on into talking about the Eastern Conference Final. I mean, of course, if you wanted me to ask what's my prediction for this match, I'll still go for the Portland Timbers to be able to win against RSL. I mean, as much as I love the Cinderella stories and I hope it's gonna continue, I just think the Timbers have too much, and even without Blanco and Espria, I think they will find a way to beat this RSL team. But with that being said, I am gonna now switch boards and look at the Eastern Conference Final that's gonna be happening on Sunday. So now we're going to talk about the Eastern Conference matchup, which is between the Philadelphia Union and NYCFC. And throughout the playoffs, and when I look at the Eastern Conference in the beginning of the playoffs, what I like about the Eastern Conference is that there's a lot of teams that have yet to win an MLS Cup, and by the time when we get to the quarterfinal, nobody actually has ever won an MLS Cup out of all those quarterfinal team. And now we are getting to a point where we're in the Western, or not in the Western, but in the Eastern Conference Final, where not only the fact that both of these teams have never won an MLS Cup, but both of these teams have never reached an MLS Cup in their franchise history. And at the end of the 90 minutes, or maybe at the end of the 120 minutes, or even maybe go all the way to a PK shootout, we will see a team that will reach their to the promised land for the first time in their franchise history. Now, this game, of course, will start at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific. The actual kickoff is 3:18 p.m. local time, and this game is going to be on ABC. Oh, by the way, if I didn't mention it, the Western Conference Final is going to be on FS1 if you haven't noticed that. But coming into this game, both of these teams kind of had to go all the way to try to make it into this game, as the Union, of course, won 2-0 in a PK shootout. And anytime when you have that kind of scoreline, something crazy has happened in that PK shootout. And that was kind of a PK shootout that, as I said, depending on how you look at it, it could either be the worst PK shootout or it could be the greatest PK shootout ever, with the way that Nashville, for whatever reason, just decided to do a San Jose Earthquakes in the PK shootout and not even score a goal, convert any of their penalty kick shootout at all. But nevertheless, the Union still won the PK shootout 2-0 against Nashville at home. And NYCFC, of course, won 5-3 in the PK shootout. And that PK shootout was kind of the complete opposite of that shit fest that we saw in the PK shootout between the Union and Nashville, where that was actually a really good shootout where, the only penalty that was missed was in the second round from the refs. But from then on, everybody converted that penalty, and NYCFC was able to do so and win 5-3 in a PK shootout against the New England Revolution, and knocking out the Supporter Shield winner. Now, in the last 5 head-to-head matchup, it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams at Yankee Stadium. But the last time when both of these teams played at Subaru Park, it was a close 1-0 win against NYCFC in a game where I remember that was not one of the most entertaining games to watch. In fact, that was a really slow game where the Union just took advantage of one of the opportunity, and just like that, they got all 3 points at that. But before that, the NYCFC did win 2-0 against the Union on the road. In fact, NYCFC had got a couple of victory against the Union on the road before. But prior to that, the Union did return the favor by winning 1-0 on the road against NYCFC. And then NYCFC winning 2-1 on the road against the Philadelphia Union. Now, notable player missing and questionable coming into this game. And this actually just happened today, where there is actually news that there could be a number of players from the Union that is currently on on the COVID protocol list. Now, I'm not quite sure how many players there is. They didn't tell exactly what it is, and most importantly, we don't know who exactly is the Union player that is on the COVID list. I'm assuming most likely from now till kickoff of this game, we'll know more about that story. But yeah, unfortunately, the Union have to go through something that the Columbus Crew did had to go through last year, where how the Crew also had a COVID outbreak. And also, I do apologize to the Union and certainly Union fans for what I said back in the beginning of the playoffs. But remember, back in the beginning of the playoffs, I talked about how it looks like with the way that even though we're still in a pandemic, we haven't seen like a lot of COVID outbreak that has gone on. So it looks like things are going to go well in the playoffs with no team suffer from a COVID outbreak. Whips! I should have pretty much shut my mouth when I said that. But like I said, I apologize for basically kind of jinxing that, because we have seen a couple of players, and especially a couple of key players during this playoffs, that is missing because of testing positive for COVID-19. And again, this is why this game is kind of hard to predict, because if the Union are going to be missing some key players coming in to this game, then the advantage might actually be swinging back to NYCFC. Now, that being said, NYCFC does miss a very important player coming into this game, and that player is the Golden Boot winner, Tati Castellanos, who I mentioned he did something really dumb in that last game against New England, where he decided to get himself sent off literally 3 minutes after he scored what looked like was the winner in extra time. Now, key points coming into this game, as I mentioned, what the starting 11 is going to look like for the Union. And again, this will also depending on when we know which players are going to be missing on the COVID list. But for Jim Curtin, that's going to be difficult for him to choose the starting 11 if he knows that there's going to be players that's going to be missing on a COVID list. And I won't be surprised that, one thing that I will say about this Union team is that even if they are going to have a couple of their starters missing for this game because of testing positive for COVID, they still do have some good depth. Like, you get a chance to get these players that is coming off the bench are mostly players that kind of come out of the Union Academy, and that you can basically insert them. And I know some people will say, well, these are still just kids, and in this type of environment, is this too big for their moment? I don't think so. I mean, so far from what we've seen, at least with even there's been times where we've seen some of these kids that is coming out of the Union Academy play in the playoffs. They have really stepped up in a big way. So I think if the Union is going to have to force to kind of play their kids in this game against the Eastern Conference Final, I'm not going to say that this is over for this team. I think they still have a decent chance. I mean, if it's going to be mostly in terms of players that is missing because of their attacking core, then I don't think that really matters that much, because as I will talk about, how their attacking core has been a huge issue for this Union team in this playoffs. And that being said, that kind of is a perfect transition to talk about the next point, where is there any of these Union forwards will step it up in terms of the goal scoring department, because basically this front three has combined of a big goose egg in terms of the first two games in the playoffs. Like, none of this front three in Jamer Montero, Sergio Santos, and Kasper Schmeichel have scored any goals. In fact, in the case of Sergio Santos, it seems like he's allergic to score goals now with some of the big howler miss that he had against Nashville SC. So the Union, knowing the fact that they're facing against an NYCFC team that can know how to score, they need to get some of those players in good goal scoring form, because I have a feeling. Well, I mean, I feel like this could be a game where it could only feature one goal, which I maybe should just kind of fast forward in terms of talk about the last key points, where I won't be surprised this could be a game that will only feature one goal, or it could go the distance, because when I look at some of these Eastern Conference matchup, most of these Eastern Conference matchup has been really close. And when you have two really good teams facing against each other in this Eastern Conference Final, I won't be surprised if things are going to be very tight in that. Maybe one goal might be enough for both of these teams to move on to the next round, or this one might also go to a penalty kick shootout. And in the case of the Philadelphia Union, so far, both of the games that they play in the playoffs have been going almost to the distance. I mean, the game against the Red Bulls, it almost went for the distance if it wasn't for Jacob Glasson decided to score a wonder goal. And then we know that game against Nashville did go through the distance, which it's another thing that I'll also say, a key point that I didn't put on here for the Union, is that with them playing back-to-back extra time games, is there going to be fatigue coming into this game? Because again, you play so many games in extra time, and although, you know, in terms of the window, no, you know, it's not like they're playing like 3 games in 7 days and all 3 of them were in extra time. But still, you know, when you play that many extra time game coming into this one, we'll see whether or not if they still have the energy to once again grind out a victory in this game against NYCFC. Which, by the way, speaking of NYCFC, which attacker for this NYCFC team was stepped up as their main goal scorer is now suspended? And one of those players that I know could potentially step up is Santiago Rodriguez. He looked really good in that game against the Revs, even scored a goal in that one, and probably could have scored a couple more if he was a little bit more clinical in terms of finishing. But when you look at this attack for NYCFC, yes, I know a lot revolves on Tati Castellanos, but it's not necessarily that the case. I mean, they do have some good attacking option on their team, and the only issue why they haven't scored as much goals and that they have really had to heavily rely on Tati Castellanos is mainly because their goal scored for haven't been very clinical in front of goal. I mean, I'm talking to you, Jesus Medina, who has just been snake bit with the way that he's just not allowed to score a goal in this playoffs, or even in this season, as he rarely has contributed in terms of the goal scoring department. But either way, this should be a very entertaining Easter Conference matchup. And again, it is really hard to predict, especially with the way that we'll get more news on which players from the Union is going to be missing because of them tested positive for COVID-19. And again, it's very unfortunate that we, of course, will have this situation. And just kind of a reminder that we're still in a pandemic, and that I probably should have never said what I did in the beginning of the playoffs, where there's not going to be a COVID outbreak in any of these teams, and everything is going to be straightforward. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you like, smash the subscribe button. Let me know in the comments below what do you think of this game and also the Western Conference Final, and your prediction of who is going to be making to MLS Cup this season. But yeah, until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.